January 22, 1943, on the jungle-choked island of Guadalcanal. Second Lieutenant John George of the 132nd Infantry Regiment found himself crouched low amidst the skeletal ruins of a bombed-out village west of Point Cruz. The air, thick with the stench of decay and humidity, was punctuated by the terrifyingly random crack of Japanese rifles. In just 72 hours, a handful of unseen, highly skilled Imperial snipers had methodically picked off 14 of his fellow Americans, sowing fear and paralysis throughout the U.S. lines. Each death was a brutal, personal lesson in the effectiveness of a single, well-placed shot. The American response had been a frustrating mix of machine gun fire and mortar barrages, spraying thousands of rounds into the dense canopy with little to no effect. The enemy remained invisible, untouchable, and deadly. But Lieutenant George had a different idea. He wasn't relying on standard-issue military hardware. Instead, he peered through the crystal-clear optics of a Lyman Alaskan scope, a state-of-the-art piece of glass mounted atop his personal Winchester Model 70. This wasn't a military rifle. It was a civilian bolt-action sporting rifle, the kind a man might use to hunt deer in the mountains back home. He had saved for 2 long years, scrimping together his meager National Guard pay to afford it. It was his pride and joy, a testament to precision and craftsmanship that he believed surpassed anything the Army had given him. To his superiors, however, it was a joke, an object of scorn, a toy. His own battalion officers had been relentless in their mockery. They saw his polished walnut stock and sleek commercial design as an insult to the rugged, battle-tested Springfield M1903s and M1 Garands that were the tools of a real soldier. Captain Morris, his company commander, had been particularly blunt. He had ordered George to leave the mail-order Sweetheart back in his tent and carry a real weapon, a proper instrument of war. The condescension in his voice was as sharp as a bayonet. His fellow platoon leaders, men he respected and fought alongside, echoed the sentiment. They would gather around him, shaking their heads with a mixture of pity and amusement, telling him that a delicate sporting rifle had no place in the grim reality of modern warfare. It was too fragile, they said. Its caliber was unproven for combat. The jungle would destroy it. George listened to their arguments, their expert opinions backed by military doctrine and tradition, but he remained unconvinced. He knew his rifle. He had spent countless hours with it, learning its every nuance, its perfect balance, the crisp break of its trigger. He knew it was capable of a level of accuracy that the mass-produced military rifles, with their loose tolerances and crude iron sights, could only dream of achieving. He had seen the problem firsthand. American soldiers, even designated marksmen, were being outclassed. They were engaging phantoms with weapons designed for volley fire, not surgical precision. The Japanese, on the other hand, had embraced the sniper as a key tactical asset, arming their best shots with scoped Arisaka rifles and turning them loose to wreak havoc. The situation near Point Cruz had become untenable. The official response wasn't working. The body count was rising. Every rustle in the trees, every shadow that seemed to move, sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the American ranks. They were being hunted. Faced with the mounting casualties and the utter failure of conventional tactics, a sense of desperation began to creep into the command structure. It was in this atmosphere of frustration that Captain Morris, the same officer who had ridiculed George's Winchester, finally relented. His skepticism was still palpable, but the steady stream of dead and wounded GIs had forced his hand. With a sigh of resignation, he gave George the one order the young lieutenant had been praying for. See what you can do with that toy of yours. Permission was all he needed. For John George, this was more than just an order. It was a chance to prove a theory. A theory that a single, highly accurate rifle in the hands of a skilled marksman was worth more than a whole platoon firing blindly into the foliage. He believed that the key to defeating a sniper was not overwhelming firepower, but superior marksmanship. It was about turning their own weapon precision against them. He was about to put his mail-order Sweetheart and his own life to the ultimate test. He was going to hunt the hunters. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing the very rules of engagement in the Pacific Theater, one perfectly aimed shot at a time. The story of how this lone lieutenant and his civilian hunting rifle systematically dismantled an elite Japanese sniper team would become a legend, a stark lesson in how battlefield innovation often comes not from the top brass, but from the grit and ingenuity of a soldier on the ground who dared to prove every expert wrong. They called it a toy, a mail-order sweetheart, unfit for a real war. But for Second Lieutenant John George, this rifle was the only thing that made sense. January 22, 1943. The stench of death hung heavy over Guadalcanal. West of a god-forsaken spot called Point Cruz, 14 American lives had been snuffed out in just 72 hours. The culprit, an unseen enemy. Japanese snipers, masters of camouflage, had turned the jungle into a killing field. Every rustle of a leaf, every shadow, could be a death sentence. The Marines were pinned down. Their standard-issue M1 Garands and Springfield 1903s proving ineffective against ghosts they couldn't see. Morale was plummeting faster than the tropical rain. Amidst this chaos, Lieutenant George of the 132nd Infantry Regiment took his position. He wasn't armed with the government-issue Springfield that other snipers used. Instead, he cradled his personal Winchester Model 70. This wasn't military hardware. This was a civilian hunting rifle, bought and paid for with 2 long years of his own National Guard pay. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, chambered in .30-06 and topped with a crystal-clear Lyman Alaskan scope. To him, it was an instrument of precision. To everyone else, it was a joke. His own captain, a man named Maurice, had looked at it with disgust. "Leave that mail-order sweetheart in your tent, Lieutenant," he'd ordered. "Carry a real weapon." His fellow officers weren't any kinder. They'd mocked him openly, saying a sporting rifle had no place in modern warfare. The military had its own specialized tools for this job, they argued. The Springfield, with its unertl 8x scope, was the designated sniper rifle. It was heavier, supposedly more rugged. Who was this young lieutenant to think he knew better than the entire U.S. Army Ordnance Department? They saw a naive young man clinging to a piece of home. They didn't see the marksman who had spent years mastering this specific rifle, who knew its every quirk, every subtle nuance. They didn't understand that in the deadly art of countersniping, the connection between a man and his weapon is everything. George ignored the ridicule. He knew what his rifle could do. He'd spent countless hours with it, learning its balance, the crisp break of its trigger. He knew that the powerful magnification of the Army's unertl scopes was actually a disadvantage here. It narrowed the field of view too much, making it nearly impossible to spot a hidden sniper in the dense, shifting jungle canopy. His Lyman Alaskan scope, with its lower 2.5x magnification, gave him a wider view. It allowed him to scan the trees quickly, to spot the subtle giveaways, a broken branch, a glint of metal, the unnatural shape of a sniper's nest. While others were squinting through a soda straw, George was seeing the whole forest. He understood something the experts had missed. Finding the target was 90% of the battle. And in the Guadalcanal jungle, his toy was the perfect tool for the hunt. As he settled in, the memory of the 14 dead Americans fueled his resolve. The laughter of his peers faded into the background. The only thing that mattered now was the view through his scope, and the silent, deadly conversation he was about to have with the enemy. The first Japanese sniper had made his nest in the V of a massive banyan tree, a classic but effective position. He was patient, disciplined, and utterly invisible to the naked eye. For hours, he had terrorized the American lines. But he made one tiny mistake. In the humid air, a wisp of smoke from his rifle, almost imperceptible, gave him away. For the American soldiers with their iron sights or high-powered scopes, it was nothing. But through George's wide-field Alaskan scope, it was a beacon. George didn't hesitate. He didn't need to calculate windage or elevation for the relatively short distance. He trusted his instinct and his weapon. The Winchester barked, a sharp, clean crack that was different from the deeper boom of the Springfields. A single .30-06 round tore through the jungle foliage. In the banyan tree, a shape detached from the branches and tumbled to the ground. One down. The silence that followed was different. It was a silence of shock, then of dawning hope. No, the American troops in the foxholes couldn't see what George had seen, but they saw the result. The invisible threat had just been made very, very real. This first kill wasn't a fluke. Over the next 4 days, John George became a legend. He moved with a hunter's patience, using his knowledge of terrain and camouflage. He wasn't just a marksman. He was a predator. He located a second sniper by spotting the faint muzzle flash reflecting off wet leaves. A third was given away by the slight movement of a vine he used for concealment. Each time, the story was the same. The enemy was perfectly hidden from everyone else, but not from George and his Winchester. He wasn't just shooting. He was outthinking them. He understood that Japanese snipers often tied themselves to trees to prevent falling if they were hit, which also kept their position a secret. So, George aimed for headshots. It was brutal, but it was necessary. Each kill was a message. Each one told the GIs in the mud that they were no longer helpless prey. The whispers in the barracks began to change. The ridicule turned to awe. The mail-order sweetheart was now being called a miracle worker. Officers who had scoffed at him were now coming to his position, not to criticize, but to watch. They saw him work, saw the calm, methodical way he scanned the trees, the seamless way he and his rifle operated as one unit. In 4 days, Lieutenant John George killed 11 enemy snipers. 11 ghosts that had been bleeding the 132nd Regiment dry, all dispatched by a man and his civilian hunting rifle. The pressure on the American lines lifted. Men could move again without the constant fear of a bullet from nowhere. The psychological impact was immense. George had single-handedly broken the back of the Japanese sniper threat in his sector. Captain Morris, the same man who had ordered him to leave the rifle behind, came to him. There was no apology, not in words. But he looked at George, then at the Winchester Model 70, and simply nodded. It was a gesture of profound respect, an admission that he had been completely and utterly wrong. The military brass took notice. Reports about Lieutenant George S.'s incredible success with a commercial sporting rifle started to travel up the chain of command. The idea that the standard-issue sniper rifle might not be the best tool for every situation began to sink in. Military doctrine is a slow-moving beast, but a demonstration this dramatic is impossible to ignore. George had proven that in the specialized world of counter-sniping, adaptability and the right tool for the specific environment trumped rigid, one-size-fits-all regulations. The legacy of John George's 4 days on Guadalcanal extends far beyond his incredible kill count. He fundamentally changed how the American military thought about sniping in the Pacific Theater. His success led to a revaluation of sniper optics. The military began to understand that a wider field of view was critical for target acquisition in jungle environments. This led to the adoption of more versatile scopes and a shift in training. More importantly, it highlighted the man-not-the-gun principle. George's intimate familiarity with his chosen weapon allowed him to perform feats that were impossible for soldiers using unfamiliar standard-issue equipment. It validated the idea that a true expert should have a say in their tools. His Winchester Model 70, once an object of derision, became a symbol of American ingenuity and adaptability. It proved that sometimes the best solutions don't come from a government committee, but from the practical experience of a soldier on the front line. John George wasn't just a soldier. He was an innovator, a hunter who brought his own tools to the deadliest game imaginable and changed the rules forever. The mail-order sweetheart had earned its place in military history. In our last episode, we left Lieutenant John George pinned down, his platoon taking heavy fire from an unseen Japanese machine gun nest. The jungle around him was a chaotic hell of explosions and whizzing bullets. His fellow soldiers were trapped, unable to advance or retreat. The standard-issue M1 Garands and Browning automatic rifles were proving ineffective against the enemy's well-fortified position. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and the screams of the wounded. Every second they stayed put, their chances of survival dwindled. It was in this desperate moment that Captain Morris, the same officer who had ridiculed George's personal rifle, crawled over to him. His face was grim, covered in dirt and sweat. "Lieutenant," he shouted over the din, "can that fancy scope of yours see where that fire is coming from?" George didn't hesitate. He knew this was his chance, not for glory, but to save his men. He crawled to a slightly better vantage point, a fallen banyan tree offering scant cover. The enemy machine gun was cleverly hidden, dug into the side of a small ridge and camouflaged with palm fronds. To the naked eye, it was just another part of the jungle. But through the crystal-clear lens of his Lyman Alaskan scope, George could see it all. He could make out the faint flicker of muzzle flash, the outline of the gunner's helmet, the glint of sunlight on the ammunition belt. The distance was about 350 yards, a challenging shot under ideal conditions, let alone in the middle of a firefight. He took a deep breath, letting half of it out to steady his body. He rested his Winchester Model 70 on a sturdy branch, the smooth wood of the stock feeling familiar and comforting in his hands. He ignored the chaos around him, focusing all his concentration into that small circle of magnified reality. He accounted for the slight crosswind, the subtle drop of the bullet over the distance. His training as a competitive shooter, the countless hours spent on ranges back home, all converged in this one critical moment. He gently squeezed the trigger. The Model 70 barked, a sharp crack that was almost lost in the symphony of battle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the relentless chatter of the Japanese machine gun abruptly stopped. A cheer went up from the American lines. Through his scope, George saw the gunner slump over his weapon, motionless. Captain Morris stared at George, his expression a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. He just nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that this mail-order sweetheart had just saved them all. The tide of the battle had turned, thanks to one perfectly placed shot from a rifle everyone had dismissed. With the machine gun silenced, the American platoon could finally maneuver. They cautiously advanced, clearing the remaining pockets of resistance. But the Japanese were masters of defense and camouflage. As the Americans moved deeper into the jungle, they started taking individual casualties. A man would suddenly cry out and fall, with no visible sign of where the shot came from. They were being targeted by Japanese snipers, hidden specters in the dense foliage. These weren't just ordinary soldiers. They were highly trained marksmen, experts at using the Arisaka rifle with deadly precision. They were masters of concealment, tying themselves to the tops of trees, hiding in spider holes, and using the jungle itself as their ultimate weapon. For the American GIs, it was a nerve-shattering experience. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The psychological toll was immense. Morale began to plummet as fear of the unseen shooter spread through the ranks. This is where John George's unique skills became invaluable. While his fellow soldiers scanned the trees with their eyes, George used his superior optics. He began a slow, methodical process he called reading the jungle. He wasn't looking for a person. He was looking for anything out of place. A branch that swayed when there was no wind. A patch of leaves that was just a slightly different color. The unnatural glint of a rifle scope or a pair of binoculars. His hunting background had taught him patience and observation, skills that were now a matter of life and death. He spotted his first target high in the canopy of a massive tree. It was a subtle detail, a piece of vine that looked too straight, too uniform. Zooming in with his scope, he saw it was a rope, and at the end of it, a Japanese sniper tied to a branch. The shot was difficult, almost straight up. George compensated for the extreme angle, held his breath, and fired. The hidden threat was eliminated. Over the next 4 days, this deadly duel continued. It was a cat-and-mouse game played out across the humid, dangerous landscape of Guadalcanal. George against the elite snipers of the Imperial Japanese Army. He would move from position to position, spending hours in one spot, scanning every leaf and shadow. He found another sniper by noticing a small pile of freshly spent casings at the base of a tree. Another was given away by the faint wisp of smoke from his rifle, something only visible through a powerful scope. With each successful shot, his confidence grew, and so did the legend of the lieutenant with the hunting rifle. The men who had once mocked him now looked to him as their guardian angel. They would point out areas where they thought fire was coming from, and George would go to work. He became the American counter-sniper, using the enemy's own tactics against them. He wasn't just fighting a battle, he was rewriting the rulebook on jungle warfare. Word of his exploits quickly spread through the 132nd Regiment. Officers who had once dismissed his toy rifle now came to observe him, trying to understand his methods. His Winchester Model 70, with its powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge, was proving to be the perfect tool for the job. It was more accurate at longer ranges than the standard-issue M1. Garand and its scope allowed George to identify and engage targets that were simply invisible to other soldiers. In a theater of war where battles were often decided at close quarters, George was proving the undeniable advantage of precision long-range marksmanship. His hunting rifle wasn't just a mail-order sweetheart. It was a force multiplier, a specialized weapon that was saving American lives and breaking the back of the Japanese sniper threat. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a specialist, and his arena was the 400-yard space where the war was being won, one shot at a time. On the 4th day of this intense counter-sniper campaign, George was credited with his 11th confirmed kill. He had single-handedly eliminated an entire squad's worth of enemy snipers. The psychological pressure on the American troops lifted. They could move more freely, fight more effectively, knowing that the unseen menace in the trees was being dealt with. The impact of George's actions went far beyond the immediate battlefield. Military commanders in the Pacific Theater took notice. The effectiveness of a trained sniper with a high-quality scoped rifle in the jungle environment could no longer be ignored. The experts, who believed that modern warfare was all about rapid-fire weapons and artillery barrages, were forced to reconsider. John George had proven unequivocally that a single, well-aimed bullet could be more decisive than 1,000 unnamed ones. His one-man war against the Japanese snipers on Guadalcanal had a lasting legacy. The U.S. military began to accelerate its own sniper programs, recognizing the need for specialized marksmen equipped with superior optics. After the war, John George returned home, not as a celebrated hero, but as a quiet professional who had done his duty. He wrote a book about his experiences titled Shots Fired in Anger, a classic account of infantry combat in the Pacific that is still studied by military historians today. His Winchester Model 70, the rifle that had been laughed at and scorned, became a symbol of American ingenuity and the effectiveness of the citizen soldier. Why did 2nd Lieutenant John George bring his own civilian hunting rifle to the Guadalcanal campaign in 1943? And how did this one decision prove every military expert wrong about what it takes to win a sniper duel? This is the incredible story of how a mail-order sporting rifle changed tactics in the Pacific Theater forever. It's January 22, 1943. Lieutenant John George of the 132nd Infantry Regiment is crouched low among the ruins west of Point Cruz. The air is thick, hot, and heavy with the smell of death. For the past 72 hours, this small patch of Guadalcanal has been a killing field. Japanese snipers, masters of camouflage and patience, have picked off 14 American soldiers. 14 men, gone in 3 days. The morale of the 132nd is plummeting. Every rustle in the jungle canopy, every shadow that moves could be the last thing they see. The Japanese snipers are ghosts, invisible and deadly. They're using the terrain to their advantage, hiding in the dense foliage of banyan trees, their smokeless powder giving away nothing. Standard-issue American rifles, the M1 Garand and the Springfield 1903, are proving ineffective against these phantoms. The Garand is a powerhouse, a semi-automatic beast designed for volume of fire in open combat. But it lacks the precision needed for this kind of surgical work. The Springfield, while more accurate, is often equipped with scopes that just can't handle the jungle's humidity and constant downpours. Their lenses fog up, rendering them useless. The American forces are effectively blind, fighting an enemy they can't see. Amidst this chaos, Lieutenant George adjusts his position, his eyes scanning the tree line. He is not looking through the standard iron sights of an M1 or the foggy lens of a military-issue scope. He's peering through a crystal-clear Lyman Alaskan scope, mounted on his personal Winchester Model 70. This isn't government tissue equipment. It's a civilian bolt-action hunting rifle, chambered in .30-06 Springfield, the same powerful cartridge as the military rifles, but in a platform built for unparalleled accuracy. George had saved up for 2 years, using his pay from the National Guard to buy this rifle. To him, it was the pinnacle of precision engineering. To everyone else in his battalion, it was a joke, a toy. His own commanding officer, Captain Morris, had berated him for it. "Leave that mail-order sweetheart in your tent, Lieutenant," he had ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Carry a real weapon." His fellow platoon leaders weren't any better. They'd openly mocked him, saying a sporting rifle had no place in modern warfare. They believed that military-grade equipment, designed and tested by the Ordnance Department, was the only thing a soldier should trust their life with. A civilian rifle was seen as fragile, unreliable, and wholly unsuited for the rigors of combat. It was a gentleman's gun, fit for hunting deer in the quiet woods of North America, not for fighting a determined enemy in the disease-ridden jungles of the Pacific. But George knew something they didn't. He wasn't just a soldier. He was an expert marksman, a competitive shooter who understood the science of ballistics and the art of the perfect shot. He knew that the Winchester Model 70, with its smooth action, crisp trigger, and superbly crafted barrel, was more accurate than any mass-produced military rifle he had ever fired. And his Lyman scope. It was a marvel. Unlike the military scopes, it was designed for all-weather hunting. It was sealed against moisture, its lenses coated to reduce glare and fogging. While other snipers were struggling with blurry sight pictures, George had a clear, magnified view of the battlefield. He had argued, pleaded with his superiors to let him use his rifle. He explained that in this kind of fight, where the first shot is the only one that matters, precision trumped firepower. It wasn't about spraying bullets into the jungle. It was about placing one single perfect round exactly where it needed to go. Reluctantly, with casualties mounting and options dwindling, his commanders had finally given in. It was a last-ditch effort, a what-do-we-have-to-lose moment. They still thought he was a fool, but they were desperate. And so, here he was, the man with the toy rifle, tasked with doing what a dozen other soldiers with real weapons could hunt the hunters. As George scanned the dense jungle, he wasn't just looking for a human shape. He was looking for anomalies, a broken branch that shouldn't be broken, a patch of leaves that seemed just a little too uniform, the subtle glint of a scope lens. He relied on the skills he'd honed over years of competitive shooting, controlling his breathing, steadying his pulse. Then he saw it. High up in a massive banyan tree, almost perfectly concealed, was a small, unnatural-looking bundle of palm fronds. It was a classic Japanese sniper hide. No one else had spotted it. To the naked eye, it was just part of the tree. But through the clear optics of his Alaskan scope, George could see the subtle outline of a helmet and the faint shadow of a rifle barrel. The sniper was patient, waiting for an American to make a mistake. But George was more patient. He settled the crosshairs of his scope, centering them on the tiny opening in the camouflage. He took a slow, deliberate breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester barked, a sharp, clean crack that echoed through the jungle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bundle of fronds shook violently, and a body crashed down through the branches, landing with a sickening thud on the jungle floor. One shot, one kill. The mocking laughter of his fellow officers fell silent. In the deadly quiet that followed, a new understanding began to dawn. Maybe, just maybe, the mail-order sweetheart wasn't a toy after all. Word of George's success spread like wildfire. The single shot had done more to boost morale than any speech from a commanding officer could. It proved that the enemy wasn't invincible. They weren't ghosts. They could be seen and they could be killed. The next day, George was back at it. He and his spotter, armed with binoculars, moved methodically from one position to another, using the ruins as cover. They worked as a team, a deadly duo of patience and precision. The spotter would scan the vast green wall of the jungle, looking for any sign of enemy activity. Once a potential target was identified, George would take over. He'd study the location through his powerful scope, confirming the target and calculating the shot. The jungle environment was a marksman's nightmare. The humidity affected powder burn rates, the wind swirled unpredictably through the trees, and the constant rain made judging distance a guessing game. But George's deep understanding of ballistics allowed him to compensate for these variables. He knew how much to lead a moving target, how to adjust for windage, and how to hold over for elevation at different ranges. These were skills learned on the shooting range, not in basic training. His second kill came later that day. Another sniper, hidden in another tree. This one was even better concealed. George only found him by spotting the faint puff of cordite smoke from the sniper's own rifle, rare mistake on the part of the Japanese soldier. Again, the Winchester Model 70 did its job. One clean shot and another threat was neutralized. Over the next 4 days, Lieutenant John George became a legend. He moved through the ruins of Point Cruz like a specter, hunting the men who were hunting his comrades. He used every trick he knew, from setting up decoy positions to using the sun's glare to mask his own movements. He tallied kill after kill. 3, 4, 5. The number kept climbing. Each one was a testament to his skill and the superiority of his chosen weapon. The very officers who had mocked him were now coming to him for advice. They wanted to know about his rifle, his scope, his techniques. The toy rifle was now being called a wonder weapon. George's success wasn't just about the hardware, though. It was about a fundamental shift in mindset. He proved that sniping in the Pacific wasn't about raw power or rate of fire. It was a chess match, a battle of wits, patience, and supreme accuracy. The military issue Springfield, with its often foggy Weaver 330C scope, simply couldn't compete with the clarity and reliability of George's civilian setup. The Winchester stock was more ergonomic, the trigger was lighter and more predictable, and the overall fit and finish of the rifle were of a much higher quality than the mass-produced military arms. It was a rifle built for a single purpose, to put a single bullet exactly where the shooter intended. And in the dense close-quarters combat of the jungle, that was the only thing that mattered. By the end of his 4-day hunt, Lieutenant John George had single-handedly killed 11 confirmed Japanese snipers. 11 ghosts, made all too real by the precision of a .3306 round. He had broken the back of the sniper threat in his sector, saving countless American lives and turning the tide of the local engagement. His actions had a ripple effect that went far beyond his own platoon. The story of the lieutenant with the mail-order rifle spread throughout the American forces in the Pacific. Senior officers, initially skeptical, began to take notice. The undeniable success of the Winchester Model 70 forced a reevaluation of the military's entire sniper doctrine. The Ordnance Department, which had previously dismissed sporting rifles as unsuitable for combat, was forced to admit they were wrong. They began acquiring Winchester Model 70s, fitting them with high-quality civilian scopes like the Lyman Alaskan and the Unertl 8X, and issuing them to specially trained Marine Corps and Army snipers. John George had, through his own initiative and expertise, started a revolution. He had proven that sometimes the best tool for the job isn't the one that's issued, but the one that's chosen. His legacy is a powerful reminder that innovation often comes from the front lines, from individuals who dare to challenge conventional wisdom and trust their own skill and judgment. The man they mocked became the man they copied. And the mail-order Sweetheart became one of the most respected and effective sniper rifles of the entire war.